Hi, I'm Donny Osmond, and welcome to The Brain Warrior's Way, hosted by my friends Daniel and Tana Amen. Now, in this podcast, you're going to learn that the war for your health is won between your ears. That's right. If you're ready to be sharper and have better memory, mood, energy, and focus, well, then stay with us. Here are Daniel and Tana Amen.
Welcome back to The Brain Warrior's Way. This is going to be a fun day. We are discussing sex with Emily. Now, I know that doesn't sound quite right, so let me explain. We're here today with Dr. Emily Morse, who is a sex and relationship expert. She's also the host of the top downloaded podcast, Sex with Emily. She's helped millions of struggling couples achieve sex and relationships they desire in order to maintain happiness and longevity. She's the #1 dating and sex expert on datingadvice.com and Twitter. She's launched Sex with Emily radio show and podcast and became Bravo Television's personality on Misadvised. I'm going to just read some of the highlights on her bio because we would literally be here all day. She is definitely the sex expert. She is author of the popular book, Hot Sex, Over 200 Things You Can Try Tonight. She's the weekly guest and co-host on the nationally syndicated radio show Loveline with Dr. Drew Pinsky, who is a friend of ours. We love Dr. Drew. And earned her Doctor of Human Sexuality from the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco. Some of this I'm going to save for the next podcast, or we'll be here all day.
So we have 4 with Emily. So It's our week of Sex with Emily. Thank you so much for being part of the Brain Warrior's Way podcast.
We're excited to be here.
Talk to us about why sex and how you became passionate about this topic.
Okay. I became passionate about sex because I was one of those very late bloomers when it came to sex. I didn't have a lot of information about it, a lot of education about it, like a lot of people, right? And I don't think it's changed much today. But also, it was always I've always been very confused by sex and also very intrigued by it. And I thought, I don't understand how people continue to have sex for a lifetime and keep it interesting. And also why going back to early on, I never masturbated. It didn't occur to me to masturbate when I was a child. And I was having sex. I'm like, this isn't so great. This seems kind of overrated. And also as I got older, I was like, I don't see how you have sex with one person. And I was a documentary filmmaker before I started this podcast. And I thought, well, we all learn from each other's stories, and I've always asked a lot of questions. So I started this podcast 12 years ago. I invited a bunch of friends over, married, gay, straight, single, and I just started interviewing them about their sex lives and their relationships. And I thought, well, I want to understand, like, what am I not getting? Because when people used to say, oh, I had the best sex in my life last night, or sex is amazing, this and that, and I thought, I don't think that I've had the best sex in my life. And I've been over too. So I was like, well, maybe I'm missing something. And so it really just came from this mission to better myself and to hear other people's stories, because I feel like we all learn from each other's stories. So that's where it started. And now 12 years later, I realize that sex is everything. Like I believe if we had a lot better sex and a lot more frequently, we'd be in a much better world right now.
Well, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you on our show is because this is an issue for people who have brain issues too. So, like you said, if your sex isn't good in a relationship, in a marriage, in an intimate, you don't have that intimacy, it can really damage relationships. But if you've got brain issues like ADD or head injuries, or you're too impulsive, or you don't know how to communicate right with your partner, it can damage relationships.
It devastates them. I've been a psychiatrist for 35 years, and people who have affairs or people who have bipolar disorder, where when they go into a manic state, they become hypersexual. It's just devastating. Although, I'm always trying to find the positive way to reframe things. I had one ADD guy that had been married 11 times. And, my first session with him, I said, wow, you're really good at getting chicks.
Right. I like it. Don't shame them.
Tell us some of the big lessons that you have learned that really resonate with your listeners. What are some of the big nuggets that are important?
I would say that the big nuggets are that, well, you were just saying that sex becomes this huge problem in relationships. It's because people don't talk about it. And I always say communication is a lubrication. And the more that you talk about sex, and the better sex you're going to have. And the problem is when people get into a relationship, and if you talk about people with ADD or, with a lot, even in any relationship, sex is going to become a little stale, a little after a while. Then, the novelty isn't there anymore. Yeah. You get busy with family, life, and children, and you put sex in the back burner, and you think, you know what, we'll come back to that once we're done. Once the kids are older, once the house gets built, once I get this job, but the problem is it's on the back burner and you never go back.
Well,
right?
I think that's sort of the normal thing. We, as a society, think that's normal. So
I'm completely harassed.
We don't prioritize.
Oh yeah, no, I would never get away with that. But that's sort of what we think is normal. Yeah.
Yeah, we do think it's normal. We don't. Here's the problem: is that we don't know how to talk about sex. Not only are we not taught about sex, we're not taught about our bodies. We're not taught about pleasure. We're just taught about. We're taught in school how to get using STDs and what.
Right. How to avoid sex and stay away from problems.
Sex. And not only that, we're not told that sex is actually important and how to prioritize sex.
Right.
How to prioritize sex in a relationship, and why if you don't prioritize it, then you're just like roommates because there's nothing there to bond you. There's not the intimacy.
That's funny. If I could interject really quickly, our 13-year-old daughter gets so mad at us. She's so disgusted because we do the opposite. And people are going to think that we're crazy, but I frequently, where we joke around, we're affectionate with each other. She's like, ew, gross, gag me, whatever. And so, but privately, I talk to her a lot about it. And she goes, Mom, no mom talks to their kid about sex like this. I go, but they should. Sweetie, I go, there's nothing wrong with sex. You just need to put it in its proper place. When you are married, when you are in a loving, intimate relationship, when you are responsible, that's a good thing that you need to make sure that you actually do understand. She's like, gross, I don't want to hear anymore.
Exactly. Well, here's the other problem. So I feel for parents because we do need to normalize sex because sex is a bad word, and sex is dangerous and it's wrong. And little girls aren't taught to love your body. Actually, the first thing we learn about sex is to cover up, and that there's something to be shamed about. There's a point in every young girl's life, little girl's life. Maybe she's 4 or 5 years old and she still has her shirt off, and she's riding her bike outside and someone says, put your shirt on, do something. And we're just told to cover up, that we're wrong, that our body parts are dirty, and we're never, that never is reframed. And we're never said, it's okay to love yourself and your body and that it's, so how to pleasure yourself. And so here's the other thing about parenting though, too, I think is that kids don't really want to hear it from their parents necessarily, but also even parents who do try to talk to their kids about it, typically the conversation goes like this, well, if you have any questions, please come to me. I'm always here for you. And I think the problem with children is they don't even know what the questions are.
Yeah. No, we actually just bring it up. I actually think she listens and she appreciates it. She just doesn't want us to know that. Does that make sense? She's taking it in.
Totally.
She just doesn't want us to know it because it would seem weird for her.
Okay. So the first big lesson is communication.
Yes, exactly.
Communication is lubrication. I like that.
That's actually that's interesting.
So
that's a good saying.
Thoughtful. Before we have to stop, what is the second one you think for couples who are really struggling in this area?
I think that for couples who are struggling, I would say foreplay starts after the last orgasm. And what I mean by that is usually to stay connected, to stay, the intellectual stimulation, to stay connected to your partner. So, text each other, talk to each other. I mean, the brain, send a sexy text or what you want to do next time you see each other. Talk about your sex life. Stay engaged with your sex life. And continue to keep exploring it and keeping it interesting and just prioritizing it. And
I like that.
So talk about what you like. Talk about
be affectionate, be playful.
Yeah, exactly. Be playful, be affectionate. Say, you know what I think? That's why, even in my book, 200 Things You Tried at Night, it is exhausting. I don't recommend you try them on one night. But open it up and just say, oh, this sounds interesting. Or, just it's fantasy, using fantasy too. I think that we're shamed a lot for that as well. And again, when your brain gets on board for sex, your body will follow. But if our brain is shut down for sex, we're not primed, we're not ready. And men and women are so different with the way we get aroused, right? Men are, women are slow cookers, men are frying pans. So you're ready to go. And we're like, I didn't even see you walk in the door. I haven't been thinking about sex all day. I'm busy. I just got home. I'm making dinner. I'm doing this or that. So I think that the way that we even approach sex is so different. And then understanding that it's okay that we're not approaching it the same way, but coming together. And then also, talking about it. Like people think, well, that's not sexy. I want my partner just to know what I want. He should be a mind reader. She should be a mind reader. I mean, I've never met a mind reader, have you? So talking about it, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you're like, I don't know where to start, that's okay. You can say, I don't know where to start, but I know that sex is really, really important. And I know that like, if we don't have sex, that things aren't going so well with us. So let's just, even if it's hand holding, it's massage, it's connecting, it's just keeping that intimacy alive.
So you said something really important that I like, and I want to actually sort of bring it up, just reiterate it before we go to our next podcast, is that we approach sex very differently. And one thing I have heard a lot from my friends, from some of our patients, is that men get upset because they feel like their wives or girlfriends or whatever are not as interested in sex because they don't initiate as often. And what you just said, that doesn't necessarily mean, because I know, because it's talking to women, doesn't mean they're not as interested. Sometimes they want to be pursued. That's one reason. The other reason that I've heard is because it takes them a lot longer to sort of unwind and start to think about things. So that miscommunication of you don't want it as much as I do is not necessarily true. That's sort of an automatic negative thought that we need to work on.
Exactly. It's not top of mind for us. And so we're not thinking when
it's top of mind for us. I wrote a book. So I wrote 2 books in this area. One is called The Brain in Love, which was so much fun for me to write. I was a columnist for Men's Health, and I actually wrote a cover story for them, Sex on the Brain, which was so much fun to write. But then I wrote Unleash the Power of the Female Brain, looking at brain differences between males and females. And men are always looking to be sort of excited and turned on, which is why they race cars. And women's brains are much busier, like dramatically busier, which means they're more worried and they have more forethought. So they're spinning more, and you need to calm them.
Right, they have to be settled.
Soothe them. And one of the other big things we learned is not everybody's brain is the same. So we have impulsive people, compulsive people, sad and anxious people. And so know your partner's brain so you can do the right strategies
I like that.
for them. If you are married to an ADD woman, she needs variety. She needs excitement. She's much more likely to have sex with you if you've just jumped out of a plane together than if you went to a sappy, loving movie. But do that with an anxious woman, and she'll never jump out of the plane, and she'll hate you, and she'll never talk to you again. So I know my wife's brain.
Massage, it's so easy, calm, holding, massage.
See, I'd rather go do something like the plane.
Right, no, I take you to the firing range, and all of a sudden you're like all wound up and ready to go. So
you just said that on our podcast.
I did that. Yes, I did. We are going to be back with Dr. Emily Morse. We're going to continue to talk about sex and the brain. When we come back, we're going to talk about common problems couples have, and Dr. Emily's solutions. Stay with us. You're on the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Welcome back to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. We are grateful that Dr. Emily Morse is here with us. She is the host of the wildly successful Sex with Emily podcast. She's helped millions of couples. She's been on Bravo. She works with our friend Dr. Drew Pinsky. She's done so many awesome things, and we are grateful that you are playing with us today. And we're going to talk about common problems that people have in their sex lives. And as I think about it, it's interest. So at some point we need to talk about hormones. It's erections, which are more problematic now than ever in history because people are diabetic, they're obese, they're not taking care of the vasculature in their body, and it's orgasm. So if we just sort of, we can go off in any direction, but let's start with low interest. I don't care. I'm not interested.
We hear that a lot, especially from women my age.
Especially for women in their 50s and 60s, it's like, I'm just done.
Let's be clear. I'm not in my 50s yet, but I'm getting close. I'm very, very close.
So women who lose interest in it is because, there's a lot of reasons why people are not, they're not interested in sex, but typically it's because it's not top of mind. I mean, it's interesting because stimulation, we often think of it as being physical, but it can lead. Sometimes we have to start with our brains, right? So a lot of women can't become spontaneously aroused like men, and so we kind of need something to help trigger that psychological arousal response. So there was an interesting study by there's this thing called the Fiera, right? And it was for women who don't get aroused, but it's a device that you put. It's kind of like a vibrator, but it's not to bring you to orgasm, but it just kind of you put it on your clitoris and use it for arousal for 10, 15 minutes a day, and you start to realize that you start to get that response, and the blood becomes more engorged. You get more down there, and then then your brain will follow when your body's on board, because our brain doesn't typically. It just doesn't work like that for women. There's no interest because. Yeah, so I'm just saying that it's sometimes we have to do other things. And I also think that for women who pelvic floor, so I think women, we become very disconnected from our bodies, right? And we're not interested because it's almost like it's a dead zone down there. So if we're not breathing into that area, we're not doing our Kegel exercises, which are so important. I have an iPhone app called Kegel Camp that every day you can set in a reminder, it's time for Kegel Camp, and you do it 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day. There's so many reasons why your pelvic floor, to strengthen it atrophies over time. this, but even just paying attention to it and the awareness of, that's part of my body. It's not just this thing out there, and I should be ready for sex. It will awaken. You will be awakened. You'll be more in touch with it. You breathe through it, and even also the stronger Kegel muscles you have. I feel for everyone who does it, you're going to want sex more often. You're going to want it more frequently. Sex is going to feel better. You're going to have more orgasms. But the not interesting, again, talk about negative messaging. It's a messaging thing. I don't want sex. I don't want sex. I don't want sex. Sex is bad. And it's becomes stressful. It becomes another item on our to-do list. There's a lot going on in our minds, and it kind of seems like the last thing. But for so many women that I talk to, when they do sex more frequently with their partner, I forget. Every time it's like going to the gym, right? The hardest part is often just getting our shoes on and getting out the door. And then once we get there, no one ever goes to the gym and says, God, why did I run on the treadmill for 30 minutes, right? I feel so much better. And to get women to connect to that, I know that I'm going to feel better. Even if you have to play a mind trick with yourself, I might not be ready for sex right now, but if I do it, I'm going to feel better. I'm going to feel more connected to my partner. And it won't be stressful.
Let me interrupt you, because you triggered something really important. So if a woman is not interested, but she uses this device a couple of minutes a day, 10 or 15 minutes a day, what she could actually be doing is stimulating neuroplasticity in her brain. And so I was just thinking, if someone's lost their sense of smell, by actually working it, by getting different scents, and first really powerful and then less powerful and so on, but working it so many times a day, they can actually begin to get their sense of smell back, because we know the brain, if properly stimulated, can create new connections and new neurons. Exactly. And so there is neuroplasticity also associated with the brain and its feelings around sexuality.
There's another point you made that I think is really interesting. There's a saying, if you change the way you see things, the way you see what you see changes. And so when you said it becomes another item on your to-do list, I don't want to gloss over that, because if you think of sex as a to-do and it's on your to-do list, as opposed to making it one of your values for intimacy, how you improve intimacy. If you think of it as, oh, this is part of if I want to have an amazing relationship, if family is one of my top values, that is one of the ways that I improve the intimacy and the love and the bonding in my life. That's very different than going, this is a to-do list for me.
Exactly.
So,
right? Like, it's the prioritization of it. It's saying, like, this is important, because if I don't pay attention to my sex life and to the connection with my partner, like, everything else in my life is going to suffer, right? Because I understand that, because we're not interested in it, so we think everything else matters.
So when I was getting married, my mom said something really kind of crude that sort of states what I'm saying now, but in a different way. I'd like to, but it was funny, and it actually stuck with me. I was getting married, and she said, if you don't take care of your husband, someone else will. And I went, ouch. So what she was really trying to say was, this is important. You need to watch the intimacy in your marriage because it matters to him. Right. So, I thought that was kind of it was like, okay, I'm not sure I would say that to my daughter, but at the same time, what she was really saying is, make it a priority, make it a bonding thing, make it something that you actually pay attention to, as opposed to just something you have to do.
And then ask for what you need so that you're an equal partner. So you're not just doing it for him, because then it becomes part of the to-do list to stay married. It's how can it become joyful connection? Right. And you know the research. In fact, Emily, you should talk about the research on the benefits of sex. They're awesome. There's
so many health benefits. First of all, another one killer of our sex drive is stress, right? Mm-hmm. We're seeing stress, especially maybe more now than ever, and more distracted. The benefits are, less stress. It can help with menstrual cramps. It can help with depression. There's skin. Orgasms are healthy. Orgasms are good for you. Like it releases oxytocin, serotonin. All the feel good hormones are so important. And also helps us connect to our partner. There's so many benefits to sex. But we're not told about these benefits. We're not told about prioritizing sex. We're not told about what's going to happen if we don't have sex. It just becomes this huge mess of a problem. And so I think if the way to look at it, instead of your to-do list, is like, wow, how can we, when we're saying our vows, you should be talking about all these things, not just, are we going to live in the city or country? Are we going to, what religion are we going to, it's like, how can we keep our sex life interesting? What can we do to continue to grow? Because sex should be expansive. You should constantly be working on it and going to and I hate even to use the term work, but like, sex is fun. Like, I always just at the end of it, sometimes I'm like, you guys, sex is supposed to be fun. It feels really good. It can, improve our mood, improve our connection. So, and how you do that is, by trying different things, novelty, right? The reason why we're so interested in new partners, because everything's new and exciting and unknown and kind of dangerous. But after a while, you're like, oh, been there, done that. But if you can find ways, new erogenous zones, typically like foreplay, right? Kissing is the first thing that goes in long-term relationships, right? One of the first things that goes. But we're like, we no longer kiss, we're like, let's get it over with. But the more we continue to focus on fantasy, arousal, all that stuff, the better sex you're going to have. Getting toys, your brain, talking about things, the words, like, let's create scenarios in our head. Let's go to a sex toy store. Let's trying a new position.
Right.
Well, it must seem just simple, like a Cosmo art, right? But like, why not? We do have so many erogenous zones, and typically we just focus on like two of them. When what if you found out like the back of your knee or your inner arm, like your wrist here could like give you orgasms. You're like, I didn't know that. Well, how amazing, right? Touch, look at you guys. You know this.
Right. Well, except one day he walks up and he's like, if you don't give me sex 3 times a week, I could sue you for attempted murder. I'm like, what?
Right. There's a study out of England on 10,000 men. Yeah. And if they had sex 3 times a week, it decreased their risk of heart attack and stroke by 50%. And so if she doesn't, fool around with me, Lord, I could sue her for attempted murder.
Right. No pressure.
But I say when I lecture about it, if a guy doesn't please his wife, because frequency is not associated with longevity for women, it is for men. What's associated with longevity for women is how much they like it. And so if you don't please her, she could sue you back.
As she should.
Or countersue.
Right. That men were saying like they feel much happier, much more like, much more successful, much more masculine when they are giving their partner or when they're learning how to please their partner. I would say women are typically responsible for their own orgasms, in the sense of a lot of women don't even know what they like or what makes them feel good. So again, that goes back to the communication as a lubrication, and figure out what feels. I mean, it is the woman's responsibility to know what feels good and how to explain it to a partner. But couples can also explore together. But yes, it's important to connect, but female pleasure is important. Now there is the orgasm gap, right? When men can take 6 to 8 minutes to orgasm, women take anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, right? So what do we do there? We go back to foreplay. We go back to exploring together. We go back to finding new things that feel good, using touch, sensation, toys, whatever it is.
Right.
Because for penetrative sex, for most women, they don't have orgasm. Only 30% of women actually have orgasms from intercourse alone. And if those 30%, not every single time.
So when you brought up something really important, about you both have about women enjoying it, and you mentioned, some of the problems associated with sex. One thing, and we should talk about this, in depth at some point in one of our podcasts. A lot of women have experienced trauma, and I mean a lot around sex, so me included. But I've taken the time to deal with it. So I think dealing with past trauma is critical because it can ruin your relationships. So that's one thing we need to delve into at some point.
Untreated trauma, I mean, it really, will wreak havoc on your relationship, and you have to get into therapy. It's not, suppressing it is not going to help anyone.
Right.
You absolutely have to get therapy and work on it, because it will. You will.
Well, and there's a specific type of therapy I really like. Called EMDR.
I love it.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's common. So if you're not interested, if it's painful for you, if it triggers anxiety, fear, panic, it's something like 40% of women have been molested, assaulted, have had sexual trauma. Now, it doesn't stick with everyone. And, some people can separate it, but other people can't, especially if it's early sexual trauma. So it's really an important issue to deal with, because it can bring space between you and
or prevent you from ever having a close relationship.
Partner.
Right. I think this is so important, because I hope this will trigger a lot for women listening who think, they just think they've already dealt with it. It was a long time ago. It really doesn't have any impact on who I am today. And that's just not true. When we talk about our brains and we talk about these memories and what's happened to our bodies, you won't be able to have healthy relationships unless, and EMDR, it has been proven so successful for so many women.
I've used it and I love it.
Yeah, I have too.
Oh, so helpful. I love this conversation. Before we go, we'll move erections to the next podcast.
Why not?
So coming up soon. Let's talk about low orgasm, especially in women.
Okay.
What are some of the things you found to be really helpful besides communication? Man, communication is just so important. It's like, and guys who are listening, it's like ask her what she likes and pay attention. Write it down. And if you forget, ask her again. Because, I always say women will say something once, and then in their head, they will think they have said it 8,000 times. And guys aren't paying attention. Guys have ADD 5 times more than women. And so it's okay to have the same conversation over and over until you really get it.
So you don't need to be frustrated around it if you just have this open dialogue that, hey, it's okay that we tell each other repeatedly.
Communication is lubrication. I like that. But what's your experience in helping people with low or no orgasm issues?
Inability to orgasm. Well, I think that, yes, there's so many things you just said that I'm like, I want to go off. But for women, it's really, first of all, understanding your own body. Like taking that time to masturbate, even when you're in a relationship, when you're out of a relationship, I think that we expect our partners to know, no matter what age. I mean, I think, especially as young women, I always said this, I think that women think someday my prince will come and so will I. He'll ride up on this white horse and he'll just, he'll know everything, right? Because he knows me. No, that's not true. And for so many women, it's going to take some time. Figure out your body, set them, really like turn off your cell phone, go in your, watch porn, read erotica. There's nothing wrong with that. If our brain is the largest sex organ, we have to feed it fantasies. Again, like reading erotica, watching, there's a reason why 50 Shades of Grey, love it or hate it, has done so much for the bedrooms of, so many women, for the sex lives of so many couples, because it fed that part of the brain that might have been just like dormant, like, oh, wow, this is possible. We don't need a Christian Grey. We don't need our partners to have like a dungeon, but we do want the novelty and something new and exciting. And so for women, it's really just figuring out what turns you on and experimenting with different touch. Lubrication. I mean, okay, so communication is lubrication, but lubrication is lubrication. And I cannot tell you, like, one of my dreams, I have a lot of, is a lube on every nightstand. Like, lubricant is so underrated because a lot of times we associate, if a woman is aroused, she will naturally lubricate, but that's actually not true. Different times a month, you're more lubricated. It doesn't matter, but just get it. I love System Joe Lube. They have a natural love line. Put it on your nightstand. Use it every time you have sex. And that helps with orgasm. When you're masturbating, in fact, there was a study by Indiana University, 70% of women, they were more likely, for women, 70% were more likely to orgasm when they used a few drops on your clitoris. Your clitoris is not self-lubricate on its own at all. So use a few drops, use touch, gentle touch all over your body. Just like figure out what makes you feel good so you can let your partner know.
So say the name again of the lubrication.
System Joe. You can go to my website, or it's Joe, J-O, sexwithemily.com, and I have a store on there, and they have a bunch of different kinds of lube. And I think that every time you have sex, couples should use it. And then we also know as you get older, you need it more often. But even when you're younger, like I had I get hundreds of emails a day from a young girl who said, I don't want, it hurts, the condom hurts, I don't want to have sex, I just want it to be over with. And they just don't know. Like, lube is like, there's like this stigma with lube, like, oh my, because for men, I think they think, well, I'm not turning her on, I'm doing something wrong, there's a problem, we better bring the lube out from under the bed. It's like, no, it actually will help you. A few drops and it can change everything. Truly, it can increase your ability because we just need that.
Male ego. You brought up the male ego. So for the men who are listening, it's not
podcast.
Just about you. And this communication issue is so important in my office with couples because she's like, oh, he won't do that. He'll feel demeaned. He'll feel belittled. And I'm like, you need to go watch Beauty and the Beast. So I just saw the new movie. It's phenomenal. But
okay.
Belle, she's awesome. She doesn't let anybody abuse her. And, clear communication. And
she's a sassy little thing.
She's a sassy little thing. I like her.
Yeah, so
right,
for
so
orgasm,
communication, lubrication, fantasy, so important because your brain actually doesn't know the difference between what you imagine and what's real. So the same parts of the brain are lighting up if you imagine it. And so working it, right? You have to develop a skill like you develop a skill of playing the guitar or writing a book, or you want to develop this skill because your life will be better and your relationships will be better.
Absolutely. And for a lot of women, like, well, I don't have any fantasies. I've never even thought about anything sexy. And it is a skill. So I just say, start with like your the last time you were really turned on, or the last time you were with a partner and you felt really good. Maybe you were on vacation somewhere, he was kissing your neck. Just think about that one moment. Like, think about something that's happened in the past. Just think about that. It doesn't have to be some elaborate, fantasy. It can just be like something that actually happened in your life and then build on that. Or even if it's just that one thing you go to, it's practice and you build on it. And it's okay to have to think those thoughts even when you're with your partner. Because again, when your brain gets on board, typically your body will follow with the arousal, especially for women.
And fun secret for people, nobody knows this, is kiss the right side of her neck.
Isn't that only if she's right-handed?
If she's right-handed, but it actually works for about 90% of people, or him. because it'll activate the left side of their brain. And the left side is the happy, motivated side, where if you're kissing the left side of their neck, it'll actually trigger or stimulate the right side of their brain, which is the more anxious side of their brain.
Interesting.
Now, do a study, and I always think this is part of the fun, part of the play, is do something and then pay attention to how it works for you. But using the hemisphere specialization, I always think is a really fun part of
I
sex.
think that's fascinating. I always just say kiss my neck. Like, why don't like kiss? What is the problem with that? Why are we stopping kissing, going right for right for sex, right for penetrative sex? So I think that also the more foreplay you have, kissing, arousal, kissing neck.
Yeah, especially for women. Yeah, like you said, we're slow cookers, and women just don't get warmed up that fast. So
Unless I take you to the range.
Right,
All right.
that's different.
We have to stop, but we are going to be back. Sex with Emily, with Dr. Emily Morse. You should go to her website, sexwithemily.com, listen to her podcast, Sex with Emily. This is an important part of your life to optimize and have skill with. Stay with us. We're at the Brain Warriors Way podcast.
we are back with Dr. Emily Morse. We are having so much fun talking about sex and relationships and how to make it right, what could potentially be wrong, how to fix some of these things, and how mostly to have fun. So welcome back, Dr. Emily. You are also a friend. You actually work with a friend of ours, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and you've got articles in Huffington Post and the New York Times. I mean, you're really well respected in the sex field. So talk to us today about erections. And what else are we talking about besides erections?
Well, let's stay with that because
Okay.
it's just a
Really?
huge
Surprise.
problem.
Not so big.
40% of 40-year-olds, according to a study from Boston, have erectile dysfunction. And 70% of 70-year-olds have erectile dysfunction. And we talk about if you have blood flow problems anywhere, it likely means they're everywhere. So it's actually one of the signs of brain dysfunction because your brain uses 20% of the blood flow in your body. And you've already said your brain is the biggest sex organ. So talk to us about your experience helping people with erectile dysfunction.
Oh God! I mean, there's erectile dysfunction. We think you'd be, premature ejaculators. They can't get hard. They think they're hard. They get soft. The whole thing, and I think a lot of it too. The brain for a lot of guys, it can be some part of a greater issue, but also it's anxiety. So a lot for men, it happens once they couldn't get hard, and then they think it's going to keep happening again and again. So I think for a lot of men, it has to do. It can be an anxious
So
disorder.
it's sort of traumatic. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Like they have like a trauma by it. They're like, oh my God, I didn't please up harder and it's going to keep happening. Of course, there's there's a lot of different reasons for it. So I think for men, it's also has to do with a lot of times with masturbation, like learning how to understand every time erectile, are you talking about premature ejaculation, any kind of erectile dysfunction? Because there's so many different ways to deal with it.
Are you talking about lack of blood flow or premature?
Well, there's so many things to talk about. So if you don't have healthy habits and you're hypertensive,
you're not healthy. You're not eating healthy. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not exercising. You're smoking. You're eating fatty foods. Yes, you're going to probably have problems with your penis. Like that is going to happen. And you think that would be enough to get men healthy, right? Because they don't want anything.
I mean, certainly enough to keep me healthy. It's like, let's do the right thing so you can make love to your wife when you're 100. fact, when I was an intern at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center, I had one of my favorite patients was 100 years old. He had a hernia operation, and I just loved him. And the day he was discharged, he's like, "Come here, come here, come here," and because I was a psych intern, so I was like the only one that actually talked to him. And he said, "How long?" And I'm like, "How long for what? How long before I can have sex with my wife?" And I'm like, "Thank you so much. You just like made my year." That it doesn't have to stop.
So that just gave you hope? Is that what you're saying?
Hope.
Yeah.
And unless it doesn't have to stop, unless you've not made good decisions and taken care of your blood vessels and your health. So, given I'm always thinking about long-term goals is, that matters. So we talk about that a lot on this podcast. What about premature ejaculation? Common problem for guys. And as you said, once it happens, they then get anticipatory
So is that like
anxiety about it. It's like stage fright, and it perpetuates itself.
Exactly. For premature ejaculation, I mean, I think for men it can be for a lot of different reasons, but they have, again, for them it can take masturbation, like it can take learning their it's like using the stop-start method. So when they're masturbating alone, and they have to ejaculatory control. Basically, they have to understand, their bodies, and when they're about to, they can retrain how they masturbate and how they have sex. But they have to understand their what do I say? Their route, where did my brain just go?
It's like an arousal template.
So they're feeling. And it's like there's a sex therapy strategy where they get almost there and then they stop.
It's use like understanding I call it the point of no return. So when you're masturbating, you can for a lot of men, they're like, I don't have ejaculatory control. I don't understand when it's going to happen or not. So it can just be exercises that they're doing on their own. And when they're masturbating, like, okay, they get to the point where they're about to have an orgasm and they stop and they do it again and they stop and start. So they can recognize when it's going to happen, and they know how to slow down, and they know how to have sex with their partner.
Or their partner can totally help them with this. So
Absolutely.
You don't have to do this alone. Your partner can totally, and your relationship is good if you see a problem like this as a problem to be solved, rather than you're going to leave
I
me
was
if
actually
I don't fix this.
I want to interject that because you said something earlier about men, this is not all about you. But the same goes for women. Women get their feelings hurt really easily. And it's like, oh, okay, so you didn't take care of me, or it becomes like, some big thing, as opposed to, okay, maybe I could be helpful. Like, how can I be helpful, and talk to him without shaming him? And
so big secret, pay attention. I read this one book I loved, helped me for the rest of my life. It's called She Comes First.
Ian Kerner, best book. Yes.
Love that book. So guys, if you're having trouble in this area, just help her have her orgasm first, and then whatever issue comes up, it's not as big a deal as and then premature ejaculation is an issue. So this is where Prozac actually works. It has cleared 100% of my premature ejaculators. It's a huge problem. I don't like SSRIs in general, and I really don't use them except here. 10 milligrams of Prozac. It just fixes this issue because it's one of the side effects. It delays orgasm. But you can work through it doing the technique that Dr. Emily's talking about.
Yeah, the stop-start method. Also, I was going to say too, The Multi-Orgasmic Male is a great book that for a lot of men can read. It has a lot of different techniques in there. But also, you can please her first. Like if you're afraid, it's okay to start and then to actually stop and make sure she has her orgasm, and then maybe your anxiety level will go down, and then you'll be able to have sex. But it's okay. And also the other thing about men and erections, since we're on this topic, is you asked me earlier, what is my audience, more listeners, more male, more female? And I think it is more male. I know it is more male because they often don't talk about sex. Even when they go to their doctors, you probably know this, they could be having problems with their penis. They're not going to talk even to their doctors about it. I can't tell how many guys and they go, just get checked out. Make sure nothing's wrong with it. I can't talk to my doctor about it. You're right. The doctors talk about your penis. That's what you should do. They feel like there's so much shame around it, but yet it's so important for men to have like full penis strength and to understand and help. But yet they won't talk about it. There's so much shame too for men.
Isn't that crazy? Because sex is everywhere and it's used for Carl's Jr., for goodness sakes, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just everywhere. But I wrote a movie once it's called An Intimate Parent-Child Talk. It's about the things parents should talk to their kids but never do. And I did a study and I found out that 90% of men did not talk to their sons about sex. That if someone talked to the boys about sex, it was the mom. And I'm like, well, that's just completely wrong.
Yeah.
Because, I learned about it from my older brother when he was like 10, and he didn't have good information. So I had bad information for, most of my young life.
Like, there's one more thing I have to say is Promescent. I can't believe I didn't bring it up. There's something called Promescent, right? And you can get it like Rite Aid now or online. And it's a quickly absorbing delay spray that it was only FDA approved treatment for premature ejaculation. And it's worked for so many of my listeners. I've been talking about it for about 4 years. You apply it to your penis like 10 minutes before sex. It absorbs into the membrane. So it doesn't transfer to your partner if you wait 10 minutes. And I would say like in 60%, 70% of men, they lasted twice as long.
Oh, interesting.
What's it called?
It's called Promescent, Promescent. It's on my website, sexwithemily.com. You don't need a prescription for it. FDA approved. Now I think it's at Rite Aid. It might have been at Target. I'm not sure, but it's and it helps you last twice as long.
Interesting.
Even if
and
it's
probably fewer side effects than Prozac.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't like for me, SSRIs to take it just for sex. There's so many other side effects that come along with it that I think if you get a bottle of Promescent, and I mean, I've used it with a partner as well, and it's like it's not like it's absorbing delay spray that's like slight. You're like, oh, but it's gonna like numb. It's not that like it. You still have great sensation, but you last longer. It's been kind of.
But you want a little bit less sensation,
right?
So
for at least short term.
Short term, so that you can have better control.
Like it's that I don't. That's
all
what I
right.
was
I'm getting hot. It's like two beautiful women talking about sex. It's
TMI.
We are going to come back and talk with Dr. Emily about ADD and sex. So helpful. Stay with us. You're listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Daniel Amen. I am here with Tana, and on the Brain Warriors Way podcast today, we have Dr. Emily Morse. So this is the fourth in our series.
So much fun.
Sex with Emily. Emily is an author of Hot Sex, over 200 Things You Can Try Tonight. She hosts the wildly popular Sex with Emily podcast. You can learn more about her work at sexwithemily.com. And today we're going to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about sex and ADD. I am also a child psychiatrist. ADD has been one of my specialties for the last 30 plus years. And I know more about this disorder than I want to know, having several children who have it, along with my wife.
You're here today with two women who have ADD.
And it can be a huge blessing because you can pay attention to 6 things at once. And it can be a curse because you can struggle in school or in your relationships. And it
affects sex.
And it can affect sex in an exciting way, but also in a really negative way. And so,
but it can be treated, and there's hope. So you just have to understand it.
Well, and my first wife, Tana's my second wife, had ADD, and I just didn't understand why, when we had sex, There had to be complete silence because she heard absolutely everything in the house that went on. She slept with a fan. It's the middle of winter. It's cold outside. I knew if I died and went to hell, the first thing I would hear is the fan.
Right.
Because they need white noise on at night. Otherwise, they can't sleep.
Yeah, that's not
they
me.
Just hear everything. And orgasms can be really hard because what orgasms require? Focus. You have to pay attention to the feeling long enough in order to make it happen. And if you get distracted by every little thing, and so I learned about this firsthand. But then I really started paying attention to my patients, and I'm like, oh, get your ADD treated. Life is going to be a lot more fun.
Yeah, and sex will be more fun. Right.
So talk to us, Dr. Emily, about what you know about people who struggle with attention span and sex.
Right. I mean, it can be, yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly what you said is that it's, first of all, we start having sex, and then we get, because so much about sex is being in the moment, being present, being connected to your partner. And if your brain is going like, oh my God, is it going to happen? Am I going to have the orgasm? What's he doing? Did I just hear a noise? Did the kids get home? I mean, there's no way that orgasm is going to happen, because sex is about being present, being connected to your body, you know, your partner, and staying with this one sensation. And then all of a sudden you get, you know, and you know, you're about to get there, and then something happens. So it can just wreak havoc on your sex life and your ability to orgasm. But the good news about it is that people with ADD crave novelty and newness. And so something that you can do is work on changing up sex. So if it's like having sex in a different location, I mean, sex can be, because people with ADD, things become very boring and monotonous and routine. But with sex, there's so much you can do, even if you're changing up the location, changing up positions, introducing toys, sensation play. Like, what if you start with like some massage or some light tickling, or, you know, some bondage, or you take away, like I always say, like, use a blindfold, like, you know, and you take away, you know, sight, and then everything else becomes more heightened. So you mix it up in novelty, and it can actually help people with ADD, because it's something new. So they're super focused. They're like, I don't know what's going to happen next year. For example, like if you used a blindfold and you are like tickling them or giving a massage or a spanking, you're going to stay focused because you're moving this, you know, you're adding a lot of new elements to it. But for orgasm, it can be, I mean, I think that was my problem when you asked like why I got interested in this, is because I never thought to even masturbate as a child. Never even occurred to me, because I think I was really anxious. I was distracted. I had ADD. It was the last thing on my mind to even touch my body. But then during sex, it was same thing, distractibility. And so I just had to focus on this topic because I wanted to have better sex. Like, this is really why it became my life work. And so, you know, I kind of look at ADD as kind of a gift now. And sex, since it can be, there are so many paths to orgasm and to pleasure, that if you kind of embrace that and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to have sex the same scheduled sex, that's not going to work for me. Right. Typical sex, but I'm going to find out what turns me on and what does. Like what that secret sauce is for me, you know, even if it's like every time it's these 3 positions, I can't have any noise. I have to have you become more aware of it, you know, and,
you know, being sensitive to touch is another big issue with people who have ADD. They can't be touched in a certain way. Now, it's not true for everybody, but high enough percentage. And they also hate things like tags, and as little kids, they take their clothes off all the time.
Little kids?
Little kids, they take, because their clothes have to be just right, or it drives them insane. So like seams on socks, and it's funny, Michael Jordan talks about, he has ADD, and he came up with the Hanes tagless underwear.
That's awesome.
Remember it? Because, you know, tags just like made
well,
him
and
crazy.
you still joke around, because you walk in the house, you can always tell when I get home, because there's a trail of clothes going up to my room. I'm like, I cannot wait to get in the house and just rip my clothes off. That didn't come out right. That totally did not come out right.
No, I know what you mean. I was a kid. It's so funny. My mom, I would walk around, and if I felt any tags, any seams, she had a about. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
So know what your part, and this is back to communication, know what they like and pay attention to it, so that he or she can focus.
Exactly.
It's really
And then get your ADD treated, because there's all sorts of controversy about stimulants and all of that. I'm a huge fan for the right brain, because what happens after I treat someone's ADD, she'll come back, if it's a woman, the first time, and she just has that little smile on her face. And I'm like, so what's the smile for? And I already know. She's like, unbelievable. I never could have orgasms, and now I can, because I can focus. And so getting the ADD treated, and it doesn't always have to be about medicine. I wrote a book called Healing ADD, where I talk about natural ways to treat it. But I'm not opposed to medicine, like I wouldn't be opposed to medicine for cancer,
Right.
or hypertension or heart disease. And, the brain has issues like your pancreas.
But keep in mind, our new program, The Brain Warriors Way, focuses on this. There's so many things that can affect ADD. Diet. So if you're eating, the wrong diet, it's going to increase your ADD. So focusing on more protein and fat as opposed to sugar. Or meditation. I know for me, meditation is like my best friend. So that's going to help you improve your focus. There's a lot of things you can do.
Of course. And, on the podcast, we always talk about what are the natural ways to do it. But I have to tell you, the little yellow pill, for so many women,
They don't know what the little yellow pill is.
Oh, it was Ritalin. Just made a huge positive difference in their sex life. So, more about ADD, but this is a critical topic, because if you have ADD, but you don't really know it, and you've never been diagnosed, but if you have a short attention span, you're easily distracted, you're sensitive to noise, orgasms are really hard, it's at least one area to explore. Would seeing if I have this make a difference in my life? Because it's obviously not just about sex.
Right.
It's about so much more how ADD can negatively
Well, and we
impact
didn't bring
people's
up the
lives.
flip side of this. People who are hypersexual because their impulsivity.
Exactly. Impulsive sex, wanting to, they always need to raise the bar to try something new, because otherwise they're getting bored. Exactly. There's that too. I mean, there's so many different, people that can be very impulsive, but they're not actually having orgasm. They just want the conquest or more partners, or they're not really having enjoyment, because nothing else can turn them on but dangerous sex.
And that damages relationships also.
Absolutely. That's why, to treat it. But I do think that meditation and meds, there's a combination of it. But once you learn to, with meditation and breath, train your mind, it's like anything else, you can actually teach yourself how to have orgasm. That's what a lot of people have to do. A lot of women, it doesn't come naturally for them. A lot of women are like, oh, when I was 5 years old and I was riding a horse, I was in the shower, I had an orgasm. But for a lot of women, it doesn't happen the way, especially with ADD. So if you learn, that's why masturbation for women, it's so important, because if you, even with ADD, it's fine. Whatever you have to do, turn on the white noise, shut your door, turn off your phone, practice with fantasy. If you can figure out your secret sauce, how you have to move, what makes you feel good. When you're with a partner, you mimic that and you bring that to the situation. These are the conditions that I need. That's okay.
Right. I was just going to say that. So even like what you were talking about earlier, that's okay. Just like the not shaming men, with ED, it's okay to work around that and figure out how it works and how it functions. But just like we talked about with, within a relationship, we need to be very careful about understand, because I know we see a lot of it in our clinics, this sex addiction, and a lot of it has to do with ADD, and that
we
devastates.
actually did a study of 200 sex addicts, and 70% had low activity in the front part of their brain, which is what we see with head trauma, but we also see it with ADD, and it was just devastating their marriages, which in turn devastated both partners. So
high risk behaviors, right? We're seeking, could be drugs, sex, right?
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get addicted because it's everywhere.
Well, it's a pleasure center. It actually affects the pleasure center in your brain, which that dopamine rush, so it becomes addictive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking now, I'm wondering if you've seen, after all these years, now with the availability of porn and sexual imagery for kids, if it's even higher the rate of people seeking that greater form of arousal, and also just people having more ADD. Like, do you feel like it's just diagnosed, or that people are just more distracted? I'm sure you get asked this question all the time. I've just been very curious about that because
no, there's more of it, because people with ADD have their kids younger. And so on average, an ADD woman has her first baby at the age of 20 because of teenage pregnancies and impulsive sexual behavior, where a woman that doesn't have ADD has her first baby at the average age of 26. So if you just think about that, over 100 years, an ADD family will have 5 generations and more children per generation, where a non-ADD family will have fewer generations and fewer children per generation. So over time, you will see genetically there's an increased incidence of ADD. Add to that, we're not exercising as much, we're not in the sun as much, we're eating more garbage. And one of the other things that's really important, I don't know if you know the app Think Dirty, love that app, but you can actually scan your products and see the toxic things that are in them that are endocrine disruptors. So why are we having more sexual problems than ever before? It's because whatever goes on your body goes in your body. And so the aluminum in your deodorant is pervasive in your body, which is now disrupting estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, and it's causing more sexual problems than ever before because they're endocrine disruptors, and your sex hormones, come from endocrine glands.
There are so many more problems with sex, I think, than ever before. I really do, on so many levels. Because even with ADD, but I don't know, there's just so many things that have to be in place for people to have great sex right now, or we think. And I do think that exercise and meditation, and people think, oh God, I can't talk about another app, like you guys know Headspace app. It's
it's great.
app.
Yeah.
I've been meditating for a long time. So for some people, they're like, I don't know how to start. It seems really overwhelming. Even 5 minutes, and running. I mean, it's not like you're doing something where you're going to get that blood flow pumping. It's just, you can talk about all these other things, but like exercise, meditation have been like such great healers, I think, and have helped so much with orgasm, with sex, confidence, all of that stuff.
Wow, I feel like we just opened up. I feel like we need way more than a week with Emily because, my daughter comes home. We're very, very open in our family, and she comes home and, starting in junior high, 7th grade, she comes home and all the boys are now starting to have porn on their phones, and how do kids handle this? And how do you take that in at that age? And then this whole idea of hormones and how it affects sex. And there's so many things we still need to talk about. I feel like we need to.
Well, but that's why we're here for people on the Brain Warriors Way podcast. That's why Emily is here for you in her podcast, Sex with Emily, or, her website, sexwithemily.com, her best-selling book, Hot Sex, over 200 things you can try tonight. Emily, it's been such a joy to host you this week. We are grateful for your time and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Brain Warriors Way podcast. We'll be back.
Thanks for listening to today's show, The Brain Warriors Way. Why don't you head over to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. That's brainwarriorswaypodcast.com, where Daniel and Tana have a gift for you just for subscribing to the show. And when you post your review on iTunes, you'll be entered into a drawing where you can win a VIP visit to one of the Amen clinics. I'm Tana Amen, and I invite you to step up your brain game by joining us in the next episode.